Religion is deeply ingrained in the African American community, so for Black people who identify as atheist, it can be doubly isolating. But recently, there's been an uptick in the number of self-identifying atheist African Americans. Now, what happens when you take religion out of Black culture? And how hard is it to come out as non-religious in the African American community? Joining me to discuss in our Google Hangout, we have Debbie Goddard, the Director of African Americans for Humanism, Jamila Bey, the host of the Sex, Politics, and Religion Hour, Spar with Jamila, Ronell Adams, he's the author of the book Aching and Praying, and Dr. Sikivu Hutchinson, the author of the book Godless Americana, Race and Religious Rebels. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's an important conversation. Our viewers are really excited about this. It's interesting when you have an issue that there aren't very many comfortable places you can talk about it. Here at HuffPostLive is definitely one of those places. We have LibRab 103. I started to question religion when I was about 12 or 13. I didn't officially become an atheist until about 17. If I knew about this sooner, I would have asked to join this segment. But Ronnie, thanks goodness that you actually knew about this segment. We reached out to you, and you have a really interesting story being African American and atheist. Can you give us a little bit about your tale?
My tale. Well, I'm African American, I'm atheist, and I'm also gay. And, so I have this double come out experience where I, come out to people as gay, and that's that. But, coming out to family, that was rough. And then the blowback you get in the form of, but the Bible says, you run into that wall when you have to then step out of another closet and say, actually, I don't really care what the Bible says. And that can put you in even more trouble than before. But I'm a rabble-rouser at this point. I'm kind of enjoying it.
Well, we enjoy you rabble-rousing here at HuffPostLive. We actually have a wonderful community member in our comments who happens to be a lesbian, ADubs1988. I've never been accepted by the Black community. I think it's a good thing to not just believe everything you were taught as a kid. I let go of Christianity around the age of 10. And Ronnie, you did have that experience where people's, when you came out, you said you were gay, the Bible says this, but which actually was taken harder for your family? Was it when you came out as gay, or was it when you came out as atheist?
I'd say atheist. When you come out as gay, because mind you, like the African American community in general, the gay community, very, very religious in a lot of senses. So when you come out as gay, you have the choice of just making your theology a bit more liberal and still saying, but I still love God, 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 and God, God, God. You can still maintain some sort of respectability. But when somebody just says, hey, look, I just cash me out on that with the religion thing. It's like, trying to sell steak to a vegetarian. It's just like, that product is done. So, and so much of the blowback you get is religious in nature, of what God thinks about your sexuality. And if you don't care what any God or goddess thinks about that, then you get a lot of, blowback from it.
We actually have a comment here from Javier Santana. You never become an atheist. You just realize you are one, in my opinion. Jamila, what do you think about that? You're actually muted. If you can go to your upper right-hand corner and unmute yourself, that would be fantastic. In the interim, if any of our other wonderful panel would like to jump in here, that'd be great.
I'll jump in. For me, it was a realization, too, there wasn't pressure from somewhere else, which I think a lot of people fear, that the atheists are like coming after your kids and trying to convince them that there is no God. For me, I became an atheist in 6th grade, where I realized, no, I guess I did become. The process involved that I was in Catholic school. In my Catholic school, we were all supposed to go through confirmation together, and my mom is Catholic, but my dad was Jewish. And so when we started asking these questions, I realized they both couldn't be right. That if the Jews were right, then obviously Jesus was not the Messiah, but if the Catholics were right, then obviously he was, and that was irreconcilable to me. And then I realized that there were other religions out there, and I didn't know what they believed and how to determine which one was right. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe the reason there are all these different stories is because they're made up, and maybe there really is no God. And I didn't even know that that was a possibility before that. So, there was a realization of becoming, and it still took a couple of years before I even knew that other people could possibly not believe in God. It was a
Yeah,
time.
and just piggybacking on what Debbie said, I had a sort of different trajectory because I came from a secular humanist household. So there was not that tradition of deep indoctrination, proselytizing, Qurans everywhere, Bibles everywhere, Christian dogma, being shoved down our throats. But of course, growing up in a predominantly African-American community in the post-civil rights era, still a very religious dominated community context. And I also went to Catholic school for blessedly only 1 year and, had sort of a trial by fire experience, with this hyper religiosity being thrust upon me and seeing all of these figures that were very debased, very debauched, very amoral. And, constantly, getting this dogma that in order to be a moral person, in order to have some sense of ethics, you needed to be religious, you needed to be God-based, you needed to have some type of faith orientation. And this is something that I violently rejected at the age of about 13 and identified on my own as atheist. I was not explicitly identified out in public, but I think that Catholic school experience, really had a paradigm shift kind of impact on me.
Well, and Dr. Hutchinson, for people who are coming new to this conversation, many people don't understand words like humanist. Can you just briefly explain what that means in the conversation when in regards to religion, in regards to atheism, in regards to being agnostic?
Humanism eschews supernaturalist explanations for the development of the universe, eschews a notion that deities, gods, figures that are not based upon rationalism, empiricism, etc., somehow inform the way in which we live our lives and somehow set the template and the standard for morality, ethics, and justice. And there are different iterations of humanism. There are religious-based forms of humanism. There's spiritualist humanism. I personally subscribe to secular humanism.
Well, everyone gets to choose for themselves what they subscribe to. Jamila, you actually refer to yourself as an atheist, an agnostic, and a humanist. You are still muted. I had no idea what's going on with your iPhone, but we have another comment here from our wonderful community member. Religion has been a source of relief for many Black people, but at the same time a shackle that holds them back from the rightful place of influence in this world. Far too many distance themselves from the world stage of global policies. What does anyone, go ahead, sorry Debbie.
I have a comment on that, which is interesting because I grew up embedded in the Black community in a Black neighborhood, but at some point switched schools to a primarily white Catholic school. And so I was pretty happy when I got to go to Temple University for college because it was such a diverse community and because they have a really large African American studies program. But I tried to start a free thought group there, an atheist group, and it was my Black friends who were least happy with that effort and argued about it and said, many of them who were involved in the African American Studies program there had rejected Christianity, had rejected what we describe as religion, but also rejected humanism and the kind of atheism that I was at the time most familiar with. So, hello? Oh, it got quiet.
I can hear you.
Can anybody hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay.
So someone told me to finish the story that atheism, they said that the story that they thought existed was that in atheism you throw off the shackles of the white man's religion, but honestly we were just embracing another kind of white man's ideology, which was very challenging to me at the time because all I knew about what I'd been presented as humanism was very Eurocentric. So that's interesting. Last time I heard shackles brought up from someone who was challenging my view was from an atheist perspective.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and certainly what's been foregrounded over the past few decades is that there is a very strong and robust history and lineage of African American humanism. And we can look, for example, to Frederick Douglass, who was very signal in deconstructing white supremacist slavocracy from a skeptic perspective, from a rationalist perspective, and really bumping heads with the African American church hierarchies, dogmas, and traditions during the slave era, and going into the Harlem Renaissance, where you had, very strong civil and human rights activists like A. Philip Randolph, like Richard Wright, like Langston Hughes, like Zora Neale Hurston, who were pushing back against the theocratic dogmas of mainstream African American social thought, and certainly mainstream American Judeo-Christian based social thought. So to somehow equate humanism with white Eurocentrism, I think is a paradox, given that there have been extremely important and seminal historical African American activists and social thinkers and intellectuals that have embraced humanism from a liberation struggle, an anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist perspective.
That certainly isn't in the children's book version. Oh my goodness, we all started talking at once. I would just say that, and then I want Jamila to get in there before her connection rolls out again. But I will just say, what you just mentioned has never, is not in any of the beautiful little children's books that you read, or the paragraphs in your history book. So Jamila, please jump in there.
Yeah. So Hubert Henry Harrison, it was called The Black Socrates. There is a long tradition, and I'm so glad that Dr. Hutchinson brought that up. Number one, there is nothing new about me. There is nothing unique about me, except I'm probably a little bit louder, and as a journalist, I do have a bit of a platform to talk about and write about humanism and the African American community, as if such a thing exists, as if there is one monolith that votes and talks and eats and has the same experience. But for the purposes of this conversation, I want to answer the earlier question before I could be heard. I identify as an atheist, an agnostic, a humanist, a secular humanist. I'm an anti-theist, I'm a free thinker, and I'm just somebody who loves to be a skeptic and call BS on most of it. If you cannot show me, if you cannot replicate it in a lab, if you tell me that it's beyond your understanding, you're probably trying to control the way I act, you're trying to control the way I give my money, and I'm a woman, so you're probably trying to control the way I behave sexually. So I really have no use for you. I am skeptical of why you're trying to control me, and frankly, it's a problem that amongst African Americans, there's this narrative that says in order to be authentically black, one must be God-fearing, one must be a good godly woman or good godly man. It's not true. It's never been true. And thanks to the internet, which we atheists own, more of us are coming out, and yay for us all.
Ronnie, jump in here. You've been quite quiet.
I've just been listening because between Sikivu and Jamila, Debbie, I feel like the slowpoke in the group, and I'm learning. I didn't come here just to chit chat. I like to listen to them talk. I'm picking up on things.
Well, one thing that I would like to say, here's the thing in the black community. I'm from Southern Virginia, and the difficulty is you have to explain yourself a lot more. I'm assuming if you feel like instead of coming from the perspective of, oh, I understand you as is, you have to have people in your business, which might be why a lot of people don't come out and share their religious or non-religious beliefs, because it just requires a lot of. It's easier just to let someone just think this is what you are because this is what everyone else quote unquote is, than to have to defend yourself, because it just requires so much drama. I know my husband's Hindu. I grew up in the Missionary Baptist Church, and I remember the angst we felt when we were getting married. Because, you go through the church training to get married in the church, which is, we had to get married in the church because I had a 400-person wedding in a small hometown. And you had to go through the training. I just was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to talk about? I just don't want any drama. I really like these people. It'd be sad if it came to blows. And we go to our training, the counseling, and my husband's quite obviously Indian American, not quite obviously Hindu, but generally speaking, he does not look Baptist. And my sweet pastor looks at him and he looks at me, And he looks to my husband and he says, so what football team do you follow? And that was the counseling. And I give him so many props for that. He kind of just didn't even force us into a conversation about religion, recognizing that we were in love, and that didn't necessarily play a role in the conversation we needed to have.
That's rare.
That's what I consider.
Rare, and you are lucky. You know, Frank, I told my husband when we were still kind of just dating.
And your husband's Jewish for people to,
Yeah, I said, you keep being Jewish all you want, but I don't believe in mixed marriages. Steelers is my religion, and you have to convert. And he did, because we live in Washington, D.C. Don't you even say that, Ronell. Don't you even say that. But I live in Washington, D.C. I don't say the name of the racial slur team that's there. Steelers is our religion. We come together around that. And that's a good point, I think, your pastor made, because people come together. They have their ritual. They have their traditional dress. They sing their traditional songs. And that's how we relate. That's how we come together. It need not have anything to do with a supernatural higher power. And doesn't exist.
Exactly. Nancy.
Yes.
When you were speaking about that, about your pastor, it actually reminded me right now of my relationship with my favorite person in the world, my grandmother. Right now, she's actually at Bible study. And I told her, I'm going to do this interview on the Huffington Post, and she'll probably look at it later. And, we just have this amazing relationship, and she is very, very faithful. But I see, I consider her a humanist. I'm probably sure she wouldn't even use that term, but, I see a very good person, regardless of which, like this smiling woman, who, if she were raised Muslim, if she were wearing a hijab, she'd still be that smiling, really kind person with Islam on top. So right now she's got Christianity on top. This is kind of how I see it. And, I just, I guess with my relationships with other people, it's not always as bad as it has been with some of the people I've known in my life. But I see a lot of people as humanists, essentially, even if they don't admit it. They seem to be better than the faith that they practice. I mean, always, when I'm comparing Christians to the Bible, I always see a better example in the person, regardless of how. I mean, Fred Phelps is better than Christianity as far as I'm concerned. It's just, acknowledging that and getting them to admit it.
Dr. Hutchinson,
so I wanted to follow up on the point that Jamila raised a little while ago about this connection between hyper-religiosity, orthodoxy, and controlling women's sexuality, because certainly one of the big galvanizing factors for women of color, African-American women in particular, to become involved in the secular, humanist, atheist, skeptic movements is the fact that this has been an extremely reactionary, draconian era when it comes to women's sexuality and commodifying the sexuality of women of color. We've seen constant attacks, constant barrage of ads, of messaging, of iconography that dehumanizes women of color, particularly around issues of reproductive justice, abortion, and contraception. And I know that was one of the real seminal issues that made me become more explicit with my atheism, linking it to activism, linking it to young women's leadership development, because there is such a demonizing dynamic within mainstream media that really, again, connects the sexuality of Black women in particular with these moral traditions. That in order to be fully feminine, in order to be fully human, you have to be Christian identified. And Black women have always been the signifier of debased, amoral, savage sexuality to begin with. So if we are not prayed up and churched up and faith-based, then we are all the more the fallen women with scarlet letters.
Hey, I have to say, I totally agree with that aspect of this. It reminds me very much of this piece, which I'm going to put in the comment well. It was on Jezebel about Tyler Perry, how he's not just an artless hack, he's a scary ideologue. And there's always this situation where, the lady in church, she's the one that doesn't end up in trouble, or church is going to save you. And and again, that's fine, but it's always such a black and white situation. It's like, it's very scary and frustrating, and it creates a very very hive mind. It creates something that it's impossible almost to unstick yourself from, especially when you're in the center of it. Debbie, were you trying to jump in there?
Whoa. Yeah, there's a lot you said there. I was thinking a lot of the different issues brought up. So I had paired with me coming out also as queer, and depending on the year of my life, coming out as LGB and or T, and that wasn't. I would think usually if I were embedded in the Black community already, surrounded by my Black friends, that would have been an issue. But I was already getting rejected for being a non-believer, so I didn't have to kind of worry about the next step. I hung out with a bunch of gays. They were my friends, and they were a lot more open about LGBTQ stuff. In fact, surveys show that the queer population, especially among young people, is hugely atheistic, hugely non-believing. So it was actually, even though I'd been an atheist in 6th grade, identified as queer later. It was in college when I got involved in the LGBT community in Philadelphia. And when I found out, as Sikivu referenced, that there's this big movement, that there's this LGBT or this atheist humanist movement, I was like, this is where I should spend my time, because if people accept critical thinking and secularism and atheism as the base, I thought, then things like their views on homosexuality and same-sex marriage wouldn't be so much an issue. I thought it was so much more foundational to change, humanism, secularism, critical thinking, and skepticism, that I threw my volunteer energies that way and learned kind of through my involvement in the queer community in Philadelphia and my involvement in the atheist movement about lots of other issues, when we come down to reproductive rights, for example, and how much of that, the control of women's reproduction, comes from the religious right and these outmoded ideologies. So I still do think that these ideas that I work so hard for are foundational to change, and we're often coming up against sort of old thinking and religious ideology. But that doesn't mean that the atheist movement doesn't also have some of its own issues, where people might become atheists but be pretty ignorant about race issues, be pretty ignorant about queer issues, although that hasn't been too much of a problem, be pretty ignorant about gender issues and feminism. Thought that would be a bone for the...
And that is interesting. Please go ahead. It is something that our commenters were bringing up, that atheism isn't perfect either. But here's the thing, it's not about perfection. It's about just even having the option and also feeling like you can be comfortable having the option, especially in the African American community. And sometimes I think it just feels like that door is so shut for so many. Again, we here in HuffPostLive are frequently often very fortunate to perhaps have an open, more open life, a more beyond the expected experience. But for many people, their community, their church, that's all they have. Those are the only people who might hire them in their small communities. They're the only people who might loan them $20 when they can't afford to buy diapers. And it's difficult to extract yourself from belief or need.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the themes that I bring up in Moral Combat and Guileless Americana is the degree to which African American religiosity, investment in organized religion, is really driven by all of these overarching structures of global capitalist economic disenfranchisement, institutional racism, and racial apartheid. So if you, as an atheist, are not critically conscious of the ways in which these kinds of dynamics and regimes, inform the investment of African Americans in going to church, in cultivating communities amongst faith-based African Americans, in getting resources that churches provide, in being steeped in a cultural, dynamic that affirms you as a person, given the regime of criminalization and dehumanization of Blacks within mainstream America, then you are not going to have any impact upon really making other African Americans comfortable with the notion that atheism and humanism are actually moralist choices, are choices that are steeped in notions of justice and ethics, that there has to be some type of dimension that deals with African American liberation struggle, given the realities of institutional racism and sexism and inequity in the United States. And this is something that is missing within mainstream atheist movement context.
For most, this is beginning to change in some places. I completely agree with you, Dr. Hutchinson. I do want to draw attention to the fact that there are a number of organizations, Atheist Giving Aid, Foundation Beyond Belief, and some of the local secular organizations in which these issues are being addressed. Somebody has had a death in the family. There are folks who, bake casseroles and show up and provide that, that support that traditionally has come from faith folk. When we saw that a tornado ripped through Oklahoma, many atheists donated to the Vitzman family, the woman who was on with Blitzer, and he told her, well, yes, you have to thank the Lord. And she responded, actually, I'm an atheist. People are people. They have their beliefs, about things other than religion. If there is someone who inherently believes that women are inferior, that African Americans are not as smart, that Asians are, whatever, and then they also, on top of that, are without the belief in a supernatural higher power, they're not going to dismiss that when it comes to thinking about how they interact with people that they hold bias against. We all hold bias, and the challenge is to address it, to understand it, to confront it, to also bring it into the fact that, okay, well, some atheists really don't like people who aren't different from themselves. That doesn't mean that atheism is the issue. It means that it's a flawed system where people get together, which is like every other flawed system where people get together. However, I do want to sort of, as I guess the kids still say give props to? But
yeah.
I want to give props to those organizations and those communities that are really trying hard to address that. And around the country, they're doing this. We're small, but we're mighty, and we're growing.
Well, we have a comment here from Zen Sufi. Atheism is the new black. I love that. And then we have this great comment from the wonderful Rona Barrymore. In our house, there's a Christian, a Mexican Catholic, and an atheist. We are a family. And so I greatly appreciate all of you sharing yourself and your families and your knowledge and your books. All of the information on our guests is in our resource well. So check that out. It's underneath this video screen.